Today we will be comparing and ordering some rational numbers. Let's take a look at our first set of problems that we'll end up seeing. And what they're asking us to do here is compare these fractions. We're comparing with the inequality sign. So as we look at the inequality sign, you can read from left to right, and that's what we're reading from here. And if I do that, I would say write less than, because it points to the left, so it's less than, or greater than, because it's open to the left. And we also have to justify our answer. And so the way we're going to end up doing this is explaining why we picked that number once we did. So first of all, what we're looking at is trying to have the same number of parts in the fraction. So for instance, here we're in eighths, so we have 8 parts that make up this whole. Here we're in eighths as well, so we have the same number of parts that make up a whole for these two fractions, and that's what we want. And so what we're going to do is we're going to compare the top numbers. And so when we look at this number, they're both negative, and so what we want is the one that's closer to 0. And so the one that's closer to 0 is this one right here. So that's closer to 0 than negative 7. So what we'd say is negative 5/8 is larger than negative 7/8. And again, my reasoning here is that the numerator negative 5 is larger than negative 7. So that's why I went with negative 5/8 being the bigger number. So the key is to always have the same denominator. Well, here we don't have that. And so what we want to do is we want to come up with a common denominator. So we could just multiply by the others, but we could come up with a smaller one so the numbers aren't so big. So I'm going to factor this down to 5 and 2, and this is 4 and 2. So what I see is if I just multiply this 8, or 3/8, by 5/5, see, then it'll have the same factors as 10. See, now 10 has 5 and 2. And so this one here needs a 4, and it just makes it so the numbers are a little smaller. And so I go ahead and multiply across. Now I have 12 over 40. And over here I have 15 over 40. So what I see is that the larger number is the one that has the larger denominator, or numerator in this case. And it's because they're positive numbers. So 15/40 is further away from 0 than 12/40. So the reason why I picked this one is that 15 is greater than 12. Over here we're dealing with negative numbers, so we're looking at the one that's closer to 0 is going to end up being the bigger one, and the reason why is because we're dealing with those negative numbers. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to look at the 3/4 and the 5/6. These numbers are the same, -4 and -4. So let's just take this 4, 3/4, and the 5/6, and let's break those numbers down. So I see that if I break this down to 2 and 2, the 6 would be like 2 and 3. The 4 needs a 3, so that's what I'm going to multiply it by. The 6 needs an extra 2. So now I have -4 and 9/12. And I'm comparing that to -4 and 10/12. So the one that's bigger is the one that's closer to 0. So closer to 0 would be 9 over 12 rather than 10 over 12, because 9 is closer to 0 than 10. And I'm going with that because of the negative numbers. So I go with the one closer to 0 is my key. And I know that when I look at it, I have 9/12. And we'll ignore the -4 for, actually we'll go ahead and write that in there. -4 and 9/12 is going to be closer to 0 because 9 is closer to 0 than that 10. Well, this next one, this time we're dealing with positive numbers, so I want the one that's further from 0. Further from 0. And again, the reason is that we're dealing with positive numbers. So dealing with positive numbers. So if we're dealing with negatives, the bigger one is going to be the one that's closer to 0. But since we're dealing with the positive, it's the one that's further from 0. So let's take the 5. Well, 5 is just going to be 5 and 1. 8, well, that would be like a 4 and a 2. And since these don't have anything in common, we have to just multiply by the other's denominator. So I'm going to multiply that by 8 over 8, and this one by a 5 over 5. So when I do that, I'll bring down the 2. This makes 16/40. Then again, I bring down the 2 and I multiply, I get 15/40. So the one that's further from 0 is the 16/4. The 16 is bigger than 15, so that's why I went with it. And so that was the reason why 2 2/5 is bigger than 2 3/8. Well, here we're supposed to compare some decimals. And so again, we're supposed to use the inequality sign to represent which one is bigger or smaller, and then we're justifying our answer. So when I justify the answer, I look at place values. So first of all, we're dealing with negative numbers, so we want the one that's closer to 0 is going to be the bigger number. And okay, so is bigger, we'll just say as well. And so when I look at the one that's closer to 0, it's like looking at the smaller number, really. The one that is closer, because we're dealing with negatives. So I look at the 5 in the 10th place, and I look at this 5. They're exactly the same. So those are both in the 10th place. So then I go to the next number. This is in the 100th place. So 3 and 1. Well, the one that is closer to 0 is the bigger number. So since 1 is less than 3, that means that 1 is the one that's closer to 0, therefore bigger. Therefore bigger, because we're dealing with negative numbers. Okay, because we're dealing with negative numbers. So that's why I would say that negative 513 10,000ths is bigger than negative 531 10,000ths. So here we're dealing with positives. So now we're dealing with the one further from 0. Further from 0 is bigger. Okay, so we're looking for the one further from 0. So again, we're looking at place values. So we start at the 7. That's in the 10th place. 0. Well, 0 is smaller. So since 7 is larger than 0, we're going to go with this one. So the reason this is bigger is because in the 10th place, 7 is bigger than 0. And that's the reason why that we go with the 73 hundredths, bigger than 73 thousandths. Well, the next number has a repeating bar up top. So what that represents is 3, 5, 9, 5, 9, 5, 9, and so on. So the 5 9's repeating. And when we look at it, and I'll rewrite the other one, 3, 5, 9, 9. Again, we want the one that's further from 0 because we're dealing with positives. So we start at the highest place value, and we work our way to the smallest place value. So we look at the 3, that's in the 1's place. Those are the same numbers, so we still have the same size number. Now we're in the 10th place. Those are the same numbers. Now we're in the 100th place. Same numbers. Now we're back into the 1000th place, but I'm back to a 5. And here I have a 9. Which one's the bigger number? 9 is bigger than 5. So since the 9 is the larger number, and the 9 is in the thousandths place, that's why I'm going with this number, the 3 and 599 10,000ths is bigger than the 3.59 repeating. Well, looking at our last one of that type, we look at the 1's place first. Again, we're dealing with positives, so we want the one that's further from 0 is the bigger number. So 1 is the same number, it's in the 1's place. Well, now I go to the 10th place, I see a 0 and a 3. So that means that 3 is the bigger number in that place value. So this is the larger value. So we'll say that 0 is less than 3, and this is in the 10th place. And so you've got to compare place values, and that's what I'm looking at. So the reason why this is the larger number, 1 3/10 is larger, is because the 3 in the 10th place is larger than the 0 in the 10th place in 1 31 10,000ths. So now they're asking us to order these numbers from least to greatest, smallest to biggest. So what we want to do is probably change them to one form or the other, either all the fractions or all the decimals. Probably best just to change it to decimals, so let's do that. 4 into 9. Well, if we didn't know what it was, we'd have to just start with 4 into 9, which goes 0 times. 4 into 90 goes 4 times. That makes, let's see here. So I'm setting this one up incorrectly. So top dog in the doghouse. Hopefully you caught my mistake before I caught it. So let's fix that. So we have the top dog in the doghouse. There it is. So we see that 9 goes into 4 0 times. I'm going to bring down that 0 and bring up the decimal point. And 9 into 40 goes 4 times. And that makes 36, and we have the same number repeating. So you can see how it's 0.4 repeating. So 0.4 repeating is just 0.44. So our smallest number is going to be 0.4, because 0.4 is the same thing as like 0.40. See, that would be just zeros at the end. 0.4 repeating, well, that would be like 0.444 and then so on. And then the 0.45 is like 0.45 and then zeros at the end. And so you can see how you have the 4/10, that's the same. But the part that's different is the hundredths place. Here's 0, here we have 4, and here we have 5. And this is the biggest number. So our number order goes 0.4, 4/10, then 4/9, and then 45 hundredths. That's the way you're going to have to write the answer, is just in the form it was in before. So same thing here. Let's change this to a decimal form. So top dog in the doghouse. And we have 3 goes into 2 0 times. Add the decimal point. And 3 goes into 20. We have 6 times. So that makes 18. I have the same number left over. So that means the 6 repeats. So that means it's going to be 1.666, and then the 6 continues to repeat. Well, over here we have 1.65, and here we have 1.7. So we compare the numbers. We look at the tenths place. Well, this is the largest number. Largest. So I'll put that one first, 1.7, on the last side, because I'm going least to greatest. Now when I compare these, I have 5 and 6. I'm looking at the hundredths place now, because I've already done the tenths place. And I have 5 and 6. Well, this is the next biggest number, that 1 2/3. So I'll write that next, 1 2/3. And then the smallest number is that 1 65 hundredths. Well, another problem here, it says that we've got some negative numbers. Always go with the smallest number is going to be the one furthest from 0. So let's change this to a decimal. So when I do that, 3/4, if I didn't know what it was, I'd have to do the work, and it's going to be 0.75. And that works out this way. 28 is what I get with 7. Bring down the 2. 4 goes into 25 times. So negative 6.75. And that's the one that's furthest from 0. So that's going to be the smallest number. Look at this, 7 and a 4. This one's bigger because it's closer to 0. So we have negative 6.75, which is negative 6 3/4. We need to write that down. And then we have the negative 6.4, because that's the next smallest number. And then we have the positive number as the biggest number. And the last one here, we've got to change these both to decimals. So 12 into 11, and we'll start off with an 8. That goes in there 96 times. And we bring this down, it's going to be a 4. And this is going to end up being 1. And let's see here. Messed up there. Let's try that once more. So I see that the 8 is not working, so that means I got more left over than what I started with. I got a 14 left over, so we'll go with a 9 instead. And so we'll put a 9 up here, and that makes 108, and that only leaves me with 2 left over. Well, that'd be a 1, and I have now 8 left over, and 80 goes 6 times, and that ends up giving me 72 with another 8 left over. So I know the 6 ends up repeating. So I know 8/9 is 0.8 repeating. And so from there, what I can look at is the one that's smallest is the one that's closest to 0, because they're positive numbers. So I have 0.8 repeating. And then I'd have the 0.91, because this 1 is in the hundredths place, and this one is in the hundredths place. But this one has an extra number here. So then it would be the 0.91. And last, it would be that 0.916 repeating. But let's go ahead and write it the way they've got it. So it's going to go 8/9, and then the 91 hundredths. And last, it's going to go the 11/12, which is the largest number. And that is our order. Well, those are the types of problems you'll see on tonight's homework. Good luck.